Ethan Cole never thought his trip to the orbital city would change his life. He was a technician from Phoenix, someone used to fixing machinery, wires, and broken panels. He enjoyed quiet work with his tools more than crowded places. But when his company gave him a chance to travel to Halcyon City, the shining station that floated in orbit above Earth, he decided to go. He thought it would be a short job trip, a chance to see something new, and nothing more. When he first stepped into Halcyon, he was blinded by the lights. The city floated high above the planet, wrapped in glass towers that glowed like sunrise against the black sky. People from every part of Earth had come to celebrate the Unity Festival. Music played in every corner, food stalls filled the air with sweet and spicy smells, and thousands of voices rose in laughter and joy. Ethan, who preferred quiet nights and simple meals, felt dizzy with the energy of it all. He wandered through the walkways, holding a paper cup of coffee like a man lost in a storm. It was on his third day in Halcyon that he stumbled into the Grand Hall. He only wanted to escape the busy crowd, and the tall doors seemed to lead into a quieter space. Inside, however, drums beat against the walls, golden lamps lit up the ceiling, and rows of people dressed in silks watched the front stage. He realized, too late, that he had walked into a ceremony. Before he could leave, several guards stopped him. They did not look angry, only serious, and they guided him down the aisle. He tried to explain that he was only a visitor, a technician lost in the middle of a festival, but the drums covered his protests. The air smelled heavy with flowers, and the floor shook faintly as the crowd clapped. At the end of the hall, standing below a crown of glass and silver, was Queen Helena of Halcyon. Ethan had seen her face only once on the news back on Earth, her expression calm as stone. She was known as a strong leader, a woman who spoke with both kindness and command. Now, standing before her throne, Ethan felt his knees weaken. This was real, and she was looking right at him. Ethan tried again to speak, but his words caught in his throat. Okay. A minister spoke aloud beside the queen, his voice announcing some kind of ceremony. Ethan did not understand the details. He thought this was a festival play, a harmless tradition, where they pulled someone from the crowd as part of their act. The crowd cheered when Ethan was placed beside her. Louder still, when Helena lifted her hand toward him. He laughed nervously. He thought he was only playing a role, helping the grand theater performance. The minister gave him a ribbon of silver cloth, and Helena placed her hand over his own. Ethan copied her movements, nervous but amused, as if he were acting in a show without rehearsal. The words read aloud meant nothing to him. He smiled and repeated them as he was told, thinking it was good manners. The crowd clapped again, louder than before, until the drums felt like thunder in his chest. When the ceremony ended, Helena's eyes stayed fixed on his. She did not smile, though she also did not look angry. Instead, there was something unreadable there, a strange mixture of surprise and duty. She leaned close enough that he could hear her voice against the noise. Her words were quiet, steady, and sharp enough to cut through his confusion. "Do you understand what you have just done?" she asked him. Ethan opened his mouth, and then closed it again. He gave a weak laugh. "I guess I just helped with the play," he said. Our gaze hardened, though not with cruelty. It felt like the steady weight of history itself turning toward him. "This was not play," Helena said. "This was a binding. You stood with me in sight of my people. You spoke the words of union. By law, you are my husband now." The words dropped into his heart like heavy stones. He blinked at her, waiting for her to tell him it was a joke, waiting for someone to laugh and pat him on the back. But no one laughed. The guards bowed. The minister sealed the record in a glowing book. The crowd cried with joy for the marriage of their queen. And Ethan, who had thought he was only a lost tourist in a hall of music and light, stood frozen at the side of the most powerful woman in the city. His hands shook. His lips parted, but words would not form. He had come for a simple work trip, but now he was married to a queen. His world was no longer his own, and it would never again be the same. Ethan woke the next morning in a chamber that looked like something from a dream. Curtains of silver cloth hung around the tall windows. The ceiling arched high above with shining carvings, and polished floors reflected the light. He sat up slowly on the soft bed, still unsure if the day before had been real. The memory of the cheering crowd, the queen's steady eyes, and her words replayed in his head. He rubbed his temples and muttered to himself. One moment he was a technician on a simple work trip, the next he was bound to a queen before all her people. The door opened, and a woman in neat clothing entered, carrying a tray of breakfast. She gave a respectful bow, something that made Ethan almost choke on his breath. Nobody had ever bowed to him in his entire life. He tried to tell her that she did not need to do that, but she only smiled politely and placed the tray on the table. The meal was grand, with fruit sliced like jewels, fresh bread, and clear water in a glass cup. Ethan had never eaten anything that looked so carefully prepared. He wanted to ask for bacon and black coffee instead, but he kept his mouth shut. When the queen finally arrived, she walked with calm steps, her gown smooth like flowing water. Everyone bowed as she entered, and even Ethan found himself standing awkwardly. Helena studied him with the same unreadable calm she had shown the night before. She sat across from him and began to speak in that same soft but commanding voice. "You should know what your place now means," she said. "The city has already accepted yesterday's union. By law and by tradition, you are my husband. The court, the nobles, and the people will expect strength from you." Ethan laughed nervously and scratched the back of his head. "I think there's been some mistake. I'm just a technician. I fix broken wires. I don't belong in a palace." Helena tilted her head slightly. "There is no mistake. You spoke the vows. You cannot return those words. What you choose to do now will decide how history remembers you." Her honesty struck him harder than the cheering crowd had. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he was ordinary, without knowledge of palaces or thrones. But there was something in her eyes, something unshakable. She was a queen, and she had chosen to share her crown with him, whether he liked it or not. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach and realized he had no choice but to continue walking forward. The days that followed were a storm of confusion. He was given suits of formal cloth, shoes that shined more than his old apartment floor, and was led to rooms filled with nobles. They whispered behind their hands as he entered. Many did not hide their surprise. Some laughed quietly and others frowned. He was called by names he had never heard before, titles that felt too heavy for his shoulders. He tried his best to smile politely, though inside he wished he could run back to the quiet streets of Phoenix. Helena stood at his side during meetings. When arguments broke out among the nobles about trade, fleets, and resources, Ethan stayed silent. He did not know their rules, their games, or their laws. More than once, he caught the disapproving glances of men in robes and women with jeweled hair. To them, he was nothing but an intruder, a common man who had stumbled into their world by accident. The whispers grew louder each day, and he said he was not worthy of her hand. At night, however, when the long halls became quiet, he sometimes found Helena speaking plainly with him. She would ask about his past, about his simple home on Earth, about the tools he used and the machines he repaired, though her face often carried the weight of command. In those private moments, she seemed lighter, almost human, as if she enjoyed hearing about ordinary things far from the pressure of her crown. Ethan found himself laughing at times, even forgetting that the world saw him as consort to the queen. She listened to him in ways no one had before, and he began to see a glimmer of warmth that made the impossible situation less cold. Still, uncertainty followed him like a shadow. Each day the nobles tested him with subtle traps in their words. They asked questions meant to embarrass him, spoke of customs he had never studied, and waited for him to stumble. Ethan tried to remain honest, giving them plain answers, even when they laughed at his simplicity. To his surprise, Helena did not scold him. Instead, her expression often softened when he spoke directly, as if she found a strange kind of strength in his lack of polish. Ethan lay awake one night, staring at the high ceiling above his bed, and whispered to himself, "What am I doing here?" He thought of home, of the streets where nobody noticed him, and of this shining palace where everyone's eyes followed his every move. He had not chosen this path, but it was his now. And though fear filled him, something deep inside told him that running away would only prove the nobles right. Ethan closed his eyes with a deep breath. For the first time since coming to Halcyon, he decided that he would not back away. He would find out what kind of man he could become beside a queen who saw more in him than he ever saw in himself. Ethan was growing used to life in the palace, though every day still felt unreal. There were rooms so large that his entire apartment back home could have fit inside them twice. There were long tables filled with food that looked more like paintings than meals. Servants and guards greeted him with polite words, though he always felt their curious eyes watching him when they thought he could not see. It was clear to him that they still doubted this strange man who had married their queen by accident. He doubted himself too, though he tried not to show it. One morning, Ethan was summoned to stand with Queen Helena at the council hall. The chamber was lined with tall pillars, and nobles filled the room, each dressed in fine robes and decorated with ornaments that signified power and wealth. Ethan sat quietly beside the queen while the nobles argued about trade, borders, and resources. He did not know most of the terms they used, but he listened carefully, hoping to understand little by little. The meeting turned when a general entered the room. His voice took command and silenced the others. He spoke about troubling signs in the city. Strange malfunctions were reported in the fusion heart, the great system that powered all of Halcyon. Without it, the shining city in the sky would fall into darkness. Workers were restless, and suspicion of sabotage spread quickly through the halls. When the general asked for advice, nobles offered long speeches with complicated plans that seemed hard to follow. They spoke of committees, drawn-out debates, and months of inspection. Ethan frowned, wondering how all these words could keep the machines from failing. He knew something about machines, though nothing on the scale of a city's fusion heart. Still, while they argued, he asked a simple question. Has anyone actually checked the lower lines themselves? Instead of just reading the reports, the chamber went silent. Some nobles chuckled as if it were nonsense for a man like him to ask. But when Helena turned her steady eyes on the general, she repeated Ethan's question. The general admitted that none of them had gone personally to inspect the deep lines. It was considered beneath their rank. Helena nodded and looked toward Ethan. Then we will go and see, she said, her words final. That afternoon, Ethan found himself wearing simple work clothes once again, walking alongside the queen, down into the lower decks of the city. To him it felt almost comforting, the smell of oil and the hum of machinery around him. The nobles avoided these places, but Ethan felt a strange sense of belonging. He squatted down at a junction box, reading the worn labels and touching the lines with the kind of care he had always used back on Earth. Helena watched him with quiet interest, her gown brushing against the steel floor. For the first time, she seemed out of place while Ethan felt at home. Hours later, Ethan noticed a strange pattern. Some connectors bore tiny marks that repeated in the same places, fine scratches almost invisible at a glance. He leaned closer and frowned. These were not from wear. Someone had tampered with them. To others, it might have looked like random damage, but Ethan knew the way machines spoke in silent signs. Whoever had done it was careful, but not careful enough. He explained what he saw to Helena, guiding her eyes to the pattern. Her calm mask did not break, but Ethan sensed the weight of her thoughts. If this is true, she said softly, then there are enemies here who wish for Halcyon to break apart. As they returned to the higher floors, guards moved at her orders, beginning a quiet sweep of the city's systems. Yet the queen kept close to Ethan, and that struck him more than the glowing machines or the heavy secrets. He realized she trusted his eyes more than the words of her nobles, even in matters that could decide the very life of the city. That night, Ethan sat in his chamber, staring out the tall window at the stars. He felt restless, caught between fear and pride. A few weeks ago, he was nobody, fixing small circuits and drinking cheap coffee. Now, by accident, he had not only married a queen, but had also begun uncovering threats against her throne. He did not feel ready for any of this, yet he could not deny a small spark inside him. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps fate had put him here on purpose. He closed his eyes and thought of Helena's gaze when she looked at him after his discovery. There had been no mockery, no doubt, only certainty. She saw something in him worth believing in, something he had never dared to see himself. That thought stayed with him as he drifted towards sleep. Somewhere beyond the safe walls of his chamber, enemies plotted against the city, and nobles whispered about his unworthiness. But deep in his chest, he knew he would not walk away. If danger came to Halcyon, he would stand and fight beside the queen who had chosen him, whether by accident or destiny. Ethan soon discovered that living in a palace was not only about wearing fine clothes or eating meals that looked like art, The court was a place of silence and whispers, where every smile could hold a hidden plan, and every word spoken in public was weighed like a stone on a scale. He had saved the city once by noticing what others ignored, yet many nobles still laughed behind closed doors. To them, he was a commoner who did not belong at the side of their queen. Rumors spread through the halls like smoke. Some said Helena had been foolish to bind herself to a man with no name of honor. Others whispered that Ethan had only played tricks to gain her hand. A few bolder voices declared that the marriage had insulted the ancient traditions of Halcyon. The words reached Ethan's ears, carried by unfriendly servants and strained faces at the council tables. Though he tried to shrug it off, the weight pressed on him each day. He was no stranger to being overlooked back home, but this was different now. Instead of being invisible, he was too visible. Every step he took was judged. Every mistake was remembered. At night, he sometimes walked the gardens alone, staring at the stars above and thinking of Phoenix, where nobody cared what he ate or how he spoke. He missed being ordinary. One night as he walked, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was a man dressed in fine robes, one of the noble advisors Ethan had seen often in the council chambers. The man greeted him smoothly, calling him "my lord," with a voice that carried no respect. After a few formal words, the advisor's real purpose slipped out. He told Ethan plainly that he should return to Earth, give up his place, and let the Queen choose a partner more worthy of her station. For a moment, Ethan almost believed he could do that, escape the endless stairs. But when he thought of the look in Helena's eyes, steady and trusting, he knew he could not run. "I am here because she believes in me," Ethan said, with a voice firmer than he expected, "and I will not abandon her." The advisor gave a cold smile and disappeared into the night. But Ethan knew the pressure would only grow. Whispers became sharper in the days that followed. Servants warned him that plots were moving in secret. Some spoke of assassins for hire, ready to end the life of the outsider who had stolen the Queen's hand. Ethan tried to stay calm, but found himself checking shadows and corners more often, his heart beating heavy in his chest. When Helena learned of these threats, she did not try to hide the truth. She called him to her side, and her voice was steady, though her eyes burned with a quiet fire. "You did not choose this union," she said, "but you have faced it with honesty. They strike at you, they strike at me. I will not allow it." Her words filled him with both warmth and fear. He had always thought of himself as a repairman, nothing more. Now he was being sheltered by a queen who was ready to fight nobles, generals, and assassins for him. He struggled to answer, unsure of what words could measure up. At last he simply nodded and said, "Then we face it together." And together is what they did. Late one evening, as Ethan walked toward his chamber, shadows moved from a dark corner. 3 masked men stepped forward with silent steps, blades glinting in their hands. Ethan froze, his pulse racing. He had never been trained to fight, but instinct pushed him to grab a chair and swing it wildly. The crash echoed through the hall, and guards rushed toward the sound. Chaos filled the night as steel clashed, and voices shouted. When it was over, the assassins were captured, bound by the Queen's soldiers. When Helena heard of what had happened, she came to him herself. She found him shaken but unhurt, sitting on the edge of the bed with his hands pressed against his knees. She knelt before him, and for the first time the Queen looked less like a ruler and more like someone who carried worry in her chest. "You stood your ground," she said softly. "You did not run." Ethan gave a weak laugh. "I nearly fainted. No warrior." "No," Helena agreed, "but you are braver than you know. You face what so many avoid. Even fear cannot drive you to abandon what you believe." Her words stayed with him long after she left. He understood now that belonging to her world came with danger, and that people might always doubt him. Yet a clearer thought settled in his heart. If he left, Helena would stand alone, and that was something he could not bear. So Ethan decided, in that quiet chamber still filled with the memory of danger, that he would not simply endure his place anymore. He would become worthy of it, no matter the cost. The weeks after the attack were not calm. The whole city seemed to breathe faster, as if it knew something dangerous was waiting just beyond the gates. Whispers of sabotage grew louder, and now people spoke of a final plan to strike the fusion heart and plunge Halcyon into ruin. Nobles demanded more guards for their estates. Generals marched across the palace halls with grim faces, and workers in the lower decks grew restless with fear. The shining city no longer glowed with the happiness of festivals, but with the sharp edge of dread. Ethan felt the change in every corner. Where once people laughed politely at his mistakes, now they looked at him with worry, as if he might know how to save them. It frightened him more than the assassins had. He was no chosen hero, only a man who happened to step into the wrong ceremony. But even as he doubted himself, he remembered Helena's eyes. She believed he could stand beside her, and that belief was something he could not betray. Helena herself had grown stricter as the danger pressed closer. In meetings, she spoke with fire and clarity, silencing nobles who questioned her authority. Yet she still asked Ethan to attend, and she did not silence him when he spoke in his plain voice. Sometimes his simple ideas cut through the endless speeches, and even the generals paused to consider them. Ethan saw then that truth did not always need grand words. Sometimes it only needed honesty. The crisis struck one evening when alarms shook the city. Lights flashed red in the sky domes, and the sound of bells cut through the air. The fusion heart had been breached. Hidden traitors had reached the lower decks with bombs powerful enough to shatter the systems. If the heart failed, the city would fall from its orbit and be lost forever. While soldiers rushed to seal the main gates, Ethan felt a strange calm come over him. Machines, wires, panels, connections. This was his world. He understood the rhythm of systems better than he understood noble speeches. He turned to Helena and said without fear, "Let me go down there. I can find what they have done. I can fix it before it is too late." Helena hesitated. Her crown had taught her never to send those she cared for into risk. But there was no time, and she read the certainty in his face. At last she nodded, her voice steady. "Then you will not go alone. I will walk with you." Together they descended into the depths of Halcyon. The air smelled of smoke and burning cables, and the heavy steel walls shook with every alarm. Soldiers fought traitors in shadowed corridors, but Ethan kept his eyes on the cords and consoles. He moved quickly, pointing out where connections had been cut, where wires glowed with false signals. His hands worked faster than Helena had ever seen, his mind alive with the rhythm of problem-solving. At the very core of the fusion heart, he found the main device. A bomb was fixed to the central chamber, its clock running low. The soldiers froze, none willing to touch it, but Ethan crouched down at once. His fingers trembled, sweat ran across his face, but his voice remained calm. "This is only a system like any other," he said to himself. "It only looks bigger. I can do this." Every second counted. He clipped a wire, twisted a panel, and pulled free a glowing cord. Sparks shot out, burning his hand, yet he did not stop. Helena stood close, her hand on his shoulder, lending him the courage he needed. At last, with a deep breath, he pulled the final connector. The light from the device died, and the clock went dark. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the sound of Ethan's exhausted laugh. The city had been saved. When they rose back to the upper levels, the crowds were waiting. Word spread faster than fire.
Ah!
They cheered not only for Helena, but also for the quiet man who had faced the heart of the city and kept it alive. Ethan stood at her side, still shocked, as thousands of voices called his name with joy. Helena held his hand in full view of her people. "This man is my husband," she declared for all to hear. "You judged him by his birth, now judge him by his deeds. He has stood where others would break, and because of him, Halcyon still shines." The cheers grew until they shook the pillars themselves. For the first time, Ethan did not feel like a stranger in her world. He felt like he belonged, not by accident, but by choice. He had proven himself not only to her, not only to the city, but to himself. That night, as stars glowed beyond the palace windows, Ethan looked at Helena and smiled. His life back in Phoenix seemed like a dream from long ago. Here he had faced fear, laughter, whispers, and danger itself. Here he had found courage he never knew he carried. And here, with Helena's hand in his, he finally understood the truth. His world had never been the same since that unexpected union, and now he would never want it to be.